I changed my whole attitude towards tax when I wanted to see, I am blessing the government to provide things for people who can't do it for themselves generally. So for me, that's a way of blessing, and I don't see it, I'm being robbed. Because most people, if they didn't pay tax, what would they do with the money? Waste it selfishly. They wouldn't give it to other people, generally.
I have something that Ruth shared with me last week, and it was from someone that passed away a few years back. His name was Neville Goddard.
Yeah.
And here's the quote that she gave me. Man is God and exists in us, and we in him. The eternal body of God is the imagination, and that is God himself. Any thoughts or comments or? I didn't get my head around it.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it sounds quite a, philosophical out there statement that has some elements of truth in it, but I wouldn't say is all true. In reality, yes, God is us and we're in him, but we're not God. So man is not God. We may be gods in a sense of sons of God, but not God. I don't remember creating the universe. Do you? And if I'm God, I would not forget anything or ever not remember. So in a sense, I understand these sort of statements, and it's quite a big issue around. I get asked this quite a lot because it's quite a controversial issue with some friends in the US that are sort of discussing this. And some people, well, we're God and that's it. So God is our imagination. I don't think God is our imagination in the perspective of some of the things I've imagined. It's like they wouldn't be very godly. If I look back in my past and history, it's like my imagination has not always been so, let's say, refined as it might be now. So in that perspective, do I understand that in our imagination or our ability to be able to engage things outside of the cognitive or outside of just what we know is in one sense referring to the fact that God is omniscient and knows everything, and therefore when we engage him, we can engage in things that we don't know, and our imagination gives us the access to that because it's not limited by I know this. I mean, I think was it Einstein who said that information can get you where you've been, but imagination can take you anywhere. So we'll always be limited if we're stuck to what we already know. And so from that perspective, there's little glints of truth in the statement, but the statement, I think, removes the personal nature of God as being, I'm in him. So he is not me. How could I be in him if he's me? I'd be in myself. Well, he's in me. I know that because I engage him there. And I also know that I engage in him, and it's different from me because I know when I engage him, I see reflected back who he says I am. And then I look at my life and think, well, that's not quite as it is, So all of those things show me that God is a personal God who wants personal relationship with me. And if we break it down to this sort of, well, he's imagination, and it's just imagination. Well, anything I imagine then must be God. Well, I don't think that's true. And anything that's moving away from a very personal relationship with God to the universe or energy or light without the personal angle of it, of course, God is the universe in one sense because everything's contained within him and he's created it all. But that doesn't mean that every part of that universe is God. It's just we're created within an environment that is him. If he's infinite, then everything must be contained within him somewhere. Now we think of it as a place. Is it in him as a place? Is it a dimensional? Is it you could have sort of go round and round in circles trying to sort of fathom out that type of thing, and then miss out on the joy of having a simple relationship with him. And because we're sort of trying to go so deep that we miss the simplicity of intimacy with a loving God who loves us. So statements like that, I know people who are sort of moving in that direction are trying to sort of fulfill the fullness of the potential of who we are as created beings, and our creativity within that as sons of God shouldn't be minimized, and we should learn more of that creative aspect. But if it moves us into a non-intimate personal relationship and more of some sort of cosmic consciousness that we're all part of, which is truth, but is not the truth, and I think that's part of it. There's elements of truth in what the statement says, but it's not the truth. And I think I would just say for anybody who is moving into sort of a I'm God type awareness, or the cosmos is me, and I've heard lots of statements and lots of memes on Facebook that I've seen people post. It's like, please don't leave the personal dynamic of a relationship with God, who will speak to you in a way which is beyond what you know, which is an indication that I'm not God, because I would know everything, and I don't. Therefore, that shows me that my relationship with God is I'm becoming like him, but I'm not him. And I may become more and more and more like him, but I'm still not him. That's for me is the reality of it.
I find that very good there, Mike, because it seems like the litmus test to it all is the personal relationship we have with our Heavenly Father. As much as I study, off-world stuff, I find that people relate to the source and very impersonal, how should we say, type of vapor or whatever, etheric entity out there, when they lose contact with the love and direct relationship that we have as his children. None that I know of can call God Father unless they have a relationship really from the heart, and that seems to be the litmus test of whether you are seeing him as Father and have this relationship.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've no problem using source or light or love, or to talk to people and relate to them, but I'm using that as in terms that they might connect to, and then introduce them to the personal angle of it. I'm not and God doesn't mind us using source or creator or whatever, because he's bigger than sort of the terms that we might use anyway. But he would not want us to emphasize energy or frequency or light above personal relationship and father and son daughter relationship. I think intimacy and love have to be real, otherwise they're just concepts, and we don't want to conceptualize God. We want to experience him and engage him, her, spirit, whatever, and I want to put terms on it that limit him, her, spirit in any way. And I think that's the danger on terminology. As soon as we label something, then the labels then tend to have a dogma attached to them, or a particular perspective attached to them, which is always going to have some limits to it. If I call God Father, and I'm therefore not aware that he's also mother, spirit, son, brother, and every other form of relationship, then I will be doing him a disservice. But that comes by experience. I can't describe the mother, brother, father relationship I have with Jesus, the Spirit, the Father, and all those things, and it be fully explaining everything, because it's a term, which is a human term that we put on an infinite God, and it's the best we can do to try and sort of give us some way of referring to the relationship. But for some, if I use father-son relationship and they had a horrible relationship with their father, earthly father, that might be a struggle for them, because they would see God as this God who beat them or abused them or did these things or didn't do these things or abandoned them or whatever. And that might be difficult. So sometimes, you sort of have to use terminology that helps people and doesn't hinder people. But ultimately, you want people to have a face-to-face, intimate relationship and experience God as love, so that they can fully enter into who they really are in their identity.
Like in this relationship, you defined a certain association when you describe God. Like you say, we are within the garden of your heart as you are within the garden of your heart. And then you also gone and said, we are in your spirit as you are within the eternal now. And we are within the soul as you are within the four faces of God. And then Merkaba and the chambers of destination. So,
yeah.
So that goes. I mean, could you just elaborate on that association?
Okay. Essentially, what I was trying to get over there, and this is what God was revealing to me. I was just sort of sharing the thoughts that I was having in a conversation with God, and equating what is very personal and immanent within to what is more the transcendent and without. So I found that everything is almost a fractal of another thing, or has a parallel. So what's going on in the realms of heaven or in the eternal now has a parallel with what's going on in me. So that's really what I was looking at. Yeah, I have a garden in my heart, but also I engage God in his garden. I engage within the Merkaba, the place of connection dimensionally there, but I also engage within his four faces. It also gives me a perspective to the same thing, but slightly different. And I think that's what I was really trying to get over there, because that's what the Father was showing me. Whatever is the macro, there's also a micro, and then there's a nano. So there's always these levels of experience. And when I'm connected there, I'm connected also in the other. And so they're not separate, but they are separate, but they're connected. So they're two-dimensional realities connected by a quantum entanglement. That's what I was trying to get over. So it's not like I am separated from myself, because myself spirit is in the realms of heaven, multiple places right now, but I'm connected. I'm not fragmented by being dimensional. And therefore, we don't want to be focused on engaging purely with God in heaven and neglect the fact that he's within us and that's on earth. And we need both of those things actually operating simultaneously to be able to fully function in a state of constant awareness and consciousness of the transcendent and the immanent aspects. That's really what I was trying to get over in that sort of description, because I was trying to put into words what I was sort of engaging in, really, and words are always going to be inadequate to describe something which is a transcendent and immanent experience. But I did sort of the best to try and say, hey, there's multiple places here, but there's also multiple places there, and they're all really connected and almost mirror one another or parallel one another. It's difficult to even describe, but that's really what it was about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes.
As much as it can, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought, the fractal image. We are not God, but we are built in his image. That's what.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's exactly what the largest thing is. I mean, even in nature, when you see a fern and you see it's broken down into fronds, and then each frond has got fronds, and then each frond has got fronds. it's just everything is patterned after that. So I think, do I look like God? Yes, I'm made in his image in one perspective, but he is the image. He is the thing I'm patterned after. So there's nothing beyond God. He is the big fractal that everything else is patterned after. So, yeah.
As much as we get into terminology and trying to conceptualize, like you say, a couple of days ago, it dawned on me that and I'm quite an avid researcher in terms of off Earth stuff going on. It looks like it all boils down to our pursuit to get back to him, to his heart, and it's encapsulated very well, totally in the prodigal son having left home and doing his own thing, and eventually realizes, I just got to go back home. And this applies to all of creation without exception. This is my conclusion.
Yeah, I would say, God has placed eternity within our heart. And I think that is almost like a homing signal or a connection to draw us back to the source, back to the heart of the Father, back home. And I think everyone has it and everyone is being drawn there, but there's a lot of distractions and a lot of noise that hinder some people being able to get there in a straight line. They tend to sort of be drawn off course quite a lot, and distracted quite a lot. So I would say, God obviously wants all of us to return to the place of intimacy that he created us for, and the whole of creation back to the position that it was intended. But obviously you look around and you think there's a lot to do, which is true, but God is faithful and his loving kindness will never fail. Therefore, I think it's pretty much guaranteed that everything will be restored eventually, but not by force, by choice. And I think even the worst of things that have fallen into a state of deep, deep darkness will eventually see the light and realize that is home. However shrouded they are in darkness, or however layered they are with scales of darkness over their eyes, eventually the light will overcome the darkness, because God is light and God is love, and therefore love is light. And there's nothing more powerful than that. And in one sense, we know darkness isn't something. Darkness is an absence of something. And there may be that someone has sort of almost shielded themselves from the light, and therefore it appears dark, but it only takes the light to penetrate and the darkness is no more. So I'm sort of very optimistic that everything will be restored in the light of love, as God originally intended eventually.
Like when we look over the history of man and the times that God has intervened on the earth, well, at least we're aware of, and in the different moves of God, things like that over the time, was that a result of God just having a plan that he was going to do that, or as a result of people or someone intervening in prayer or whatever? And so as we look at, like, I know as you go forward, you're looking at opening up things, gates and things like that, and for things to happen as a result of that, to bring more light. But going back when they probably that wasn't happening.
It's difficult to define what was going on in the heart of the person that God engaged. So what was happening with Abraham when God engaged him? What was happening with Moses when God engaged him? So we think, oh, well, God just intervened. almost sort of like unilaterally. But we don't know what was going on. If God has placed eternity in the heart, was something within Abraham sort of looking towards who is the creator, because Jewish history says that Abraham's father was an idol maker, and therefore there must have been some sort of awareness that these idols refer to God in some way. And maybe he looked at the futility of all his father's idols and thought, well, this can't be it. What else? Who is God? It obviously didn't need pieces of stone or wood or whatever the idols were made out of. So maybe something was stirred within the heart of Abraham, who then reached out with his spirit, perhaps, and God responded. I know it says if we draw near to him, he'll draw near to us. So it indicates somewhere that something within us connects somewhere that draws him. Now, that being said, right throughout history, probably people have been praying. People have been, and even those who didn't know that they were praying were probably praying. Even if they didn't have a personal relationship with God, people had prayed, right back from the beginning. Something, obviously once things changed and the relationship changed between God and man, then religion really became man's way of re-engaging God. But I think a lot of people probably get to a point where they know just religion doesn't work, so maybe they're looking for something else, and God responds to them. Now God is not inactive. He's at work in everybody to bring about good and reveal himself. So where does that leave then personal choice about, or is he just controlling everything? I don't think he's controlling everyone, because I do believe he's given everyone the right to choose, but he's not inactive in helping them make that choice. Some of that is as a result of people praying maybe for somebody else, and some of it may just be what's going on within the person themselves, which, without talking to Abraham and asking him, well, what was going on when you first encountered God? And we assumed that was the first encounter that's recorded in the Bible. Well, maybe it wasn't. That's just the first thing that was recorded. And of course, lots of other things may have happened which aren't recorded there. So I think it's difficult, unless God specifically tells us, or we ask him and he gives us direct information, or we ask one of the cloud of witnesses and they tell us what went on, which has happened. I've talked to Adam and asked him certain things about what went on, but I didn't ask him lots of other things, just didn't feel led to, or never have felt led to. So in some senses, I don't know all the answers to that question, but I know God is constantly in work. He's constantly looking to draw us into a deeper relationship with him, or to reveal himself to people so that they choose to relate to him. And of course, in a sense, God spoke certain things into being, and those words still carry frequency on them for activation. So when God said about the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, and that the seed of the woman was going to come, and then it also talks about the seed of Abraham and the seed of David, they would come and fulfill something. Those words had power on them, creative power on them, to bring them about. So Jesus came to fulfill what God said. So the energy was still on it. So maybe that energy has been on his words all the time, and that has also brought about things that align with that. Because obviously that the seed of the serpent has sought to stop the seed of the woman coming to crush its head all the way through. And so you can sort of see that taking place. But I do believe that the energy and active power of God's words are creative and don't fall to the ground, if you like. They won't return to him without accomplishing what he said. Now we've got to be careful that we don't interpret what he said in the way that we might like it to be rather than the way that it is. And that's, I think, a lot of prophecy gets misinterpreted or misunderstood because we use our own understanding to make it sound as if what has said means this when it might not be. And even people who prophesy in part out of their own understanding of what they think God is saying. And, you know, I've engaged with several prophets to ask them, well, what did you mean? And they've said, well, I used the best words that I had framed by my understanding. But now I realize that that was only partially true because I didn't have the full understanding to be able to say what God was trying to say without me filtering it. And therefore it came through the person. You know, and when I was talking to Bob Jones about certain things that he prophesied would take place, and he said, well, I used the words that made sense to me and the ones, but I realized that they were inadequate. So using the word revival immediately has a whole lot of connotations around it that we would interpret depending on what our experience is or what we think of revival as about what's going to happen. And God may have not wanted revival as that word as we know it. So what did he want? Well, it's difficult to define, isn't it? You know, to put into words sentiments, because I don't think it was automatic mouth that he opened his mouth and God spoke through him, and they were all God's words. They were him trying to express God's words. And from what Bob Jones said to me is that he didn't always do a good job. And that caused confusion with people. So, yeah, I think when we look back, all I can say is that God is constantly looking to fulfill his original intention and purpose, and therefore looking to bring about the restoration of everything back to that. But I don't think he rides roughshod over individual choice. But it doesn't mean he gives up. Love never fails. So love will never stop looking to open someone's heart so they can experience that relationship that God intends them to have.
I'd like to deviate a little bit from our course, Mike, and ask you, have you ever run into unum sanctum and a bull that in 1302 was promulgated by the then Pope, I think Benedict or something his name was. Have you ever run into that? He established a unum sanctum. It's fascinating. As the undisputed, how should we say, ruler of all things at the time, he took it upon himself to create a trust in which he included the land, air, and the people and all things on the earth. And he put all of that under him as the vicar of Christ and created a bull and a document, signed it, and it is found in the archives of the Vatican. And it was established because nobody how should we say, challenged it. No kings, no one. So he had the authority, took upon himself the authority to elevate kings and bring kings down, to do all things. He actually, if you wish, commandeered all the souls of the earth as the vicar of Christ. And someone challenged that not long ago and wrote a document, sent it to the Vatican. And it was quite a thing. It's quite historic. This is another enslavement, a demonic enslavement upon mankind that was perpetrated.
Okay. Well,
Thwart our trip back to
personally, no, I've not heard of that specifically. But in reality, just because someone writes something and sticks it in a file and doesn't mean it's true or it has any power other than what you give it. So just because a pope, whoever he was, said this, does that make it any different than me saying something or anyone else saying something? Why he assumed that he had as the vicar? Well, he's not the vicar of Christ. Yeah, we know there's no apostolic succession from pope to pope or whatever. That's just nonsense. So in one sense, just because someone says something, does that give it any validation or any sense of authority? Now, if someone believes it and then operates under it, well, then it will affect them. But it's certainly not affected me. I've never accepted that the Pope had any authority over me whatsoever, ever. So from that sense, it's meaningless what he said. And I didn't know anything he did, and therefore I've never given any assent to it. But there are certainly things I have given assent to in a doctrinal perspective, more from an evangelical perspective, which have had power over me, because I accepted them and believed them. So, it depends really on what you're saying. Is he enslaved, or mankind was already enslaved in lost identity? So I don't quite sort of know exactly what you think that did and what effect that had on everybody. And I would doubt whether it had as much effect as people would probably think. But those who certainly agreed to it or assented to it, maybe it did affect them. But Jesus came obviously to set us free, and as soon as someone has a revelation of the truth and they have experience of the truth sets them free, irrespective of what any pope said, whenever he said it. But, there's all sorts of obviously mystery and conspiracy surrounding the Vatican and all sorts of stuff. Some of it may have some truth in it and some of it really doesn't. We're into the sort of things of Dan Brown and and that type of fiction, really, some of it. Now, did he write with some elements of sort of insight? Maybe, but the Da Vinci Code and all that stuff, they're not actually real. But the good film. I quite enjoyed the film, even though totally didn't believe in what it was saying, but still enjoyed the film. I like Tom Hanks; he's a good actor. So but I don't know. There's lots of things that have been done. I mean, if I sealed something up and put it in a time capsule and said all these things, would it have any power? What power do you think it had?
Well, the power that was, how should we say, in this was the fact that people consented to it.
Well, if they assented to it, yeah, that would give
unknowingly, like you and I, we weren't asked when we were born that we should be certificated and lose our identity again once again, our bodies, and the authorities that commandeered us actually in certificating us, creating.
I just don't believe any of that.
Well, that's true, Mike. It
isn't true. I mean, I didn't agree to that, and to be honest, it's just one of those conspiracies that's out there. It's not true. It's something which has been said a lot, and it has no power over me or you whatsoever, unless you give it. If you can give anything which is a lie power over you if you believe it. I don't believe any of it. It's got no power over me. I would suggest you don't believe in conspiracies.
Well, it's not a conspiracy. That if you historically proven, and
the conspiracy is that it has power over you. It doesn't.
Well,
when you were born, did you give a cent, or any time in your life, did you give a cent to some certification?
well, let's
I didn't.
shift to another area. Income taxes. Income taxes. We haven't consented to income taxes, but we're taxed
Actually,
to the grave.
I did. But when I voted for my government, I assented to the fact that they have a right to tax me.
Mhm.
And I also assent to that because I receive the benefits of my health service and my police state and my fire state and all the other things that they do from the taxes that I give them. And I don't begrudge giving them money, because if those things weren't there, there would be chaos. I don't have a problem giving taxes for them to make roads for me to travel on safely and to have safe things in place. I have no issue with that whatsoever, because government is something that the Bible says that God has instigated. Therefore, I don't have a problem with them doing the things that they're supposed to do. I do have a problem with them doing things that they're not supposed to do. So if they were to tell me what I can or can't do in my own understanding, well, then they would be impinging on my personal choices to believe God or those type of things. But in general, I pay my tax, and I don't even look at it as if I'm paying it, as if it's an obligation. I give my tax willingly because they use it for things that benefit me. So I don't have a problem with tax. If there was no tax, you wouldn't have a government, and you wouldn't have a health service, and you wouldn't have all the other things. So to me, those things, again, they're coming back because you're buying into something which is a philosophy around sort of a conspiratorial thing about, well, they've got the right, they're taking this, there's no taxes, and I've heard it all. And I've seen all the conspiracy stuff around all this, and the fact that, oh, you're sold into this, and you got your names on a register, and they own you, don't have I mean, it is, to be honest, it's just not true. And if you buy into it, you come under it. I don't have any agreement with any of it, so I live happy and enjoying life, and I don't have any nonsense around any of that stuff. So do I begrudge my government actually taxing me? No, I don't. I don't have an issue with that whatsoever, because I certainly benefit from that tax a lot. I have no issue with the health service in the UK being paid for and funded by my tax. I would fund it even if I didn't have to, because it is such a benefit to everybody. And that's the problem, because when you have to pay for something to benefit other people, some people are so selfish they don't want to do it. I work and I earn and I pay tax. That benefits the people who don't work and earn, who can't work and earn, or are sick, so that they can have a service that they can't pay for. I want to bless them with that service. So my attitude towards tax isn't built up in this, well, I'm being robbed by the government. Now, there are certain taxes that I do think are unfair, like inheritance tax. Like you pay, your family or whatever pays taxes all their life, they pay all their dues, and then the government takes 40% of it when you die. Well, to me, that is downright robbery. I totally accept that. But generally, most of the taxes that I pay, I have no issue with. Why would you? Why would you have an issue on tax? How do you think things are going to be funded? You're going to pay for your own road? Your own street lights? Your own police force? Anything like that that's there to benefit generally, ambulance services, all the things that you take for granted, they're not actually for free. They're funded by something, and the government funds them. Now, ultimately, if we're going to live in the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven, we may not be subject to the government funding them. We may well be able to do that ourselves in a different way in the future. Because I don't believe the political system is the answer in the long run to everything, because I believe that the kingdom of God is the answer. How is the kingdom of God going to work? How is a well-being economy going to work? How are we going to, if we were to live in a community that was separate from government, how would we run it? How would we be able to provide everything? Well, we would probably do it in a completely different supernatural way, I guess, by choosing that reality and seeing that reality form, because we'd all be in agreement with each other. Part of the problem, government struggles to operate because people are so antagonistic to it. Sometimes. Now, sometimes you can say, okay, maybe some of the things they do I don't like, but most of the things they do I accept are things that need to be done, and I wouldn't want to be doing them right now. So I'm quite happy, and as soon as I changed my whole attitude towards tax when I wanted to see I am blessing the government to provide things for people who can't do it for themselves generally. So for me, that's a way of blessing, and I don't see it I'm being robbed. Because most people, if they didn't pay tax, what would they do with the money? Waste it selfishly. They wouldn't give it to other people, generally, So.
But the hold that the Pope has is actually similar to saying that a fast food restaurant has a hold on me. It's like Kentucky Fried Chicken. Who cares what kind of relevance they are? I mean, they can claim that they have a hold on me. I mean, really, the Pope doesn't. I don't know why people believe that.
Well, because it is a bigger, deceitful system that is there to actually draw people into these things and control them by fear. Because it's all fear-based. Well, I'm controlled by the Pope. Oh no, my identity has been, locked away in some series of numbers, and all the other stuff that I've heard. To be honest, it's like none of it's true, but people believe it's true, and they're afraid of what that implies. So it's fear-based, and therefore it does have control if you allow it to. But perfect love casts out fear, so I'm not afraid of anything. And as soon as I look at any of those things, I use the truth frequency to scan it. And I scan it to see, is it true? Is it got an element of truth? Is it absolutely a lie? And therefore I will then treat it from that. And I look at all the things that people say, the Great Reset and Nisara and Gasara and all the other stuff's out there. I look at it all, and I scan it with a truth frequency, and I see what is and what isn't true from that perspective. And to be honest, 99.9% of most of the conspiracy stuff that's out there isn't true. But there is some that has an element of truth, and that's twisted, and therefore that confuses people of what's true and what isn't true. And there are some things which, if you believe it, you will potentially apply it to your own life, because what you believe will be operating in you. So, I don't have any issue with any of those things. Now, that being said, do I believe in global powers and global things that are in position to maintain the status quo of who controls the world through money and everything? Yeah, of course I do. It's like, I believe all that's going on, and I think ultimately that needs to be brought into the light, and people need to be set free from any of that is in operation, and therefore people need to choose a different way of life and not be subject to the financial controls that are on them, or any of the other controls of media or anything else that's on them. So I'm not saying that there aren't things that need to be brought into the light. It's just a lot of the things around that make it very confusing, because conspiracies actually confuse the truth and don't really bring the truth out. And that's why a lot of those conspiracies are promoted by the same people who don't want to be found out. Those people who are in control don't want people to know they're in control. So they're very happy to confuse everyone with a whole load of nonsense, so that what is actually obvious is not seen as obvious because it's hidden. That's part of the problem. We do face a lot of what is true, what isn't true, and a lot of it's confusing. That's my spend time with the truth, Jesus. Be so in tune with the frequency of truth, resonating with truth, that when you see things which aren't true, they're just obvious to you. And when there's mixture, you can discern the mixture from the rest. So throw out the rest and just keep that which is the true bit, and you won't go far wrong. But any of this stuff is fear promoting, and it doesn't make you happy and didn't give you a happy life. You know, the Pope has never had any influence over me. And just because he wrote something, it has no power over me whatsoever. No different than you writing something in a book and saying, well, I'm controlling the world now. It's one sense deluded, and people follow deluded people. So that's the reality. People do believe things like that because we're conditioned by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil to be susceptible to deception. You know, mankind is very susceptible to deception because we followed and walked away from the truth and followed the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It makes us open to lies, which is why Jesus came as the truth and said, the truth that you know will set you free, and you will be free indeed. So let's make sure we're not caught up in a whole load of stuff which is just bringing us back under something that Jesus came to set us free from. And the political and religious spirit are very much involved in that. And everything that you've said actually comes down to the political and religious spirit. You know, you're talking about the Pope, religious, you're talking about taxation, political. Now, the religious and political spirit do function, but they're quite happy to operate in deception to make you think that they're more powerful than they are, or have more effect than they do. And if you buy into a religious spirit, well, then you will be deceived by it. If you buy into a political spirit, you'll be deceived by it. I don't buy into either. Yeah. So I try to be objective when I look at something and test it to see. Which is why, you know, I mean, I was talking to a good friend of mine recently, who you know really well as well. And he was also sharing me how when he was listening to some people who were quite well known, he was so shocked by how deceived they were. You know, and you only have to look at something like the Elijah list and look at the stuff that they're promoting, and they're supposed to be the prophetic movement. And what they're promoting is just so much nonsense and dangerous nonsense. A lot of it. It isn't true. And yet they're the prophetic people. All the QAnon stuff which was going on. People have bought into a whole load of things because they're susceptible by the religious and political spirit. And actually QAnon stuff brought in both religious and political and joined them together in this sort of religious political movement to wipe out terrible things. People bought into it, were so deceived by it, and still are. You know, some people are still doubling down on it and still haven't given up on it, you know. And the reality is we need the truth, and that's only going to be found by face to face. Let's go back to the intimacy of God face to face, and he will reveal the truth. And that truth will be based in love. And whenever you see something which isn't based in love, you know it isn't the truth. It's a good, and again, a good measure to measure it against. Yeah. Anyway.
Mike, in Global Sons, they're Nancy's Cohen's group, they're saying how important meditation is, and they're actually doing meditations now. So I was listening to, well, I've listened to theirs, which are good, but I listened to Joe Dispenza because he did a meditation, and in that he was saying you have to go into nothing, and then I've listened to Kirby Delanerol, and he's going into the void, and then you've done meditations as well. I've done those, and then and you also, when you were talking at one point, talked about spaghettifying, which sounds like you're dispersing into nothing as well. So I just
No, not dispersing into nothing, dispersing into everything. That's the difference. That's the difference on these meditation things. You're not emptying your mind to enter into something or something enter into you. You're focusing your mind on God, on love, on Jesus. It's always the positive. You're filling your mind and focusing your intention on something, not emptying your mind to whatever might come along. So there's a huge difference between being connected to everything and being in a void of nothingness and finding something out there. So again, I would encourage people not to engage in meditation, which is not personal and which takes you into an esoteric something that you don't know. And I'm not saying that when I enter into my intimacy and meditation with God, that I know everything. But what I know is I'm engaging with someone who does know everything. I'm not finding mysterious hidden something out in the void. And there's a danger in that. And I think it sucks people into opening their mind to things in a way which it could be inviting something to fill you because you're emptying yourself so you can be filled with something. I don't think that's what meditation is from when we're told to meditate day and night. That is going to be focusing our attention on a person, God, Father, Son, Spirit. That is what, for me, meditation is all about. It's intentional focusing to engage in relationship with the Father. Anything outside of that, I would be careful of. Now, I'm not saying Joe Dispenza and all those people, and there's a lot of stuff that he says, which I agree with, but I think you just got to be careful. You don't buy everything without discernment. Just discern it. Is this going to draw me closer to the Father? And if I'm not focusing on him, for me, it's like, well, what am I focusing on? Some hidden, mysterious stuff out there in the void of nothingness? Well, why would I want to do that when I can go engage personal face-to-face with the Father and with Jesus, the truth and the Spirit of truth? I don't need that. I don't need this sort of hidden, to be honest, a cult means hidden. And when it's like this knowledge is hidden. Now, I know it talks about God has hidden stuff for me to discover. Yes, but it's going to be discovering it in him, not independently of him and separate from him. So I would say just be careful. And just because the word meditation is used doesn't mean that that has the same meaning for all who are using it. And if I'm looking for health and wholeness and to bring my whole body into health by meditating, I'm going to meditate on the healer and the frequency of health and healing that's in him. I'm not going to focus on some sort of esoteric view of, well, it's out there somewhere. I'm going to focus on what I know, that God is my healer and God intends me to be whole. So that's really where my health and wholeness is going to come, in my relationship with him, rather than anything else. But it's one of those things that when you start to expand your consciousness, there's a whole lot of things that you may come across. I wouldn't assume that they're all right or all good. Use discernment when you're engaging with anything. And again, the more you spend time with the genuine, the easier it is to discern that which isn't genuine. And some people, like, Joe Dispenza, would not be using overt religious terminology because his mission is probably to reach people outside of the religious setting. and therefore does not use words which is going to put off people or offend them. So it's just making sure, but in the pursuit of not offending people, you've got to be careful also that you don't open people up to something which they're not sure about. You see, when someone is meditating, they know what they're doing. Other people might not know what they're doing. Therefore, the same technique could be more dangerous for them. And in the pursuit of not wanting to offend anyone or put people off, you also don't want to also open people up to the risk of danger. So I'm just sort of aware that people's motives may be good, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everything that they say doesn't need to be discerned. I would ask everyone to discern everything I say. Take it back to the Father. Don't just assume. So I wouldn't assume either. But I also don't want to be skeptical or cynical about things. I want an open heart and an open mind, but I also want to use the discernment that I have in the Spirit to determine what is and what isn't good. And, it does say that we can train our senses to discern. Now, I don't meditate anymore. I live in a meditative state. And there's a difference between meditating to get you somewhere than actually being where that meditation has taken you. And therefore, you don't need the meditation anymore. You can live in the reality of the conscious awareness you have of being in the presence of God, or God being in you, rather than, well, I'm going to meditate so I can get to this place. If you're at that place, why do you want to meditate anymore? You just live in that place. So personally, I don't use any of those techniques that I would have taught people, and I use to get to the place I am now. I am at that place. So I am aware consciously of my state of being in union and oneness with the Father. Therefore, that is a very different thing from what I was doing in meditating to get me to a place where I was able to engage the Father, which is valid to get you there, but you just don't want to keep doing the same thing when you're there. It's like you build a scaffolding up to make the house and put on the second floor. When the house is complete, you take the scaffolding down and leave it up. So a lot of the things that I did to get me to the place I am with the scaffolding, which I no longer use or don't need. Does that make sense?
Because Dispenza he knows technically that the theta waves are in the range of 7.83 or so, and to get to that state of elevated consciousness, I think that's his purpose. He understands. Another very interesting thing he said about Schumann's resonance, says it's been spiking to over 30 plus, and that is associated with elevated consciousness also. Yeah. And since you all were, every time you all got together, Schumann's resonance spiked. So I was wondering whether the converse is true, actually. Higher frequencies. What is the purpose of when all the gates are opened? Would that actually lead to a sort of extension of the entire planet?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, in the beginning, when Adam was walking with the Father on earth and in the realms of heaven, and heaven and earth were in a sort of connected state, in that state, all of the frequencies produced a harmonious balance, which was fruitfulness. It produced the environment that everything could be fruitful as God intended. But when all those frequencies were dissipated and removed, and certain things happened on the earth, and the gates were shut, and things no longer functioned that way because the path to the tree of life people walked away from that and chose to walk another path, then things on the earth are less than God intended. But the whole system needs to be rebalanced and reconnected and brought back into harmony, so everything could come back into that state of union and oneness and harmony that produced a environment where everything was perfectly connected and one with each other and in relationship with one another and function together. So the whole solar system and rebalancing the planets and getting the frequencies and the gates opened and the everlasting doors opened all produce a system where everything's in wondrous harmony. Well, we're not there yet. So we're looking for a restoration to a place where those frequencies are operating in a way which is conducive to health, wholeness, immortality, abundant life, fruitfulness, and all the positive things that the Father wanted for us to live in. So I do believe the system is being restored so that we get back to that state. I think the Earth Shield is participating in sort of creating a environment where the good things can be accentuated and the bad things can be protected against. So there's a lot of things happening around awakening and frequency that we're becoming aware of, and I know, we've been engaging with the West Gate and the other gates and the everlasting doors and looking at the gates beyond those gates and dimensions and the gates into the solar system and the planets and things like that. We've been looking at all that, and then someone else comes out and says, oh yeah, we're going to open the East Gate because the East Gate's going to die, but you can't open any of the other gates, So there's a whole load of stuff out there that people are in flux about where they are with it all. And some people will be picking up some aspects of that and some will be picking other aspects of it. And I'm not knocking what someone's saying, but I'm saying, well, you're not going to be telling me that I can't open the West Gate that God has told me I can. Even though you're saying, well, you're going to open the East Gate for this. Great, bless you. That's wonderful. But actually, I know God has said you can open the West Gate. I know God told me that back in 2015. So, I'm not going to be sort of controlled by anyone else who says you can't. Like when someone says you can't restore for an angel, well, I've done it. So tough. There it is. It's not going to affect me by telling me I can't do something that I'm already doing. But we're all at different stages of it. And therefore, you do tend to pick up people start talking about similar things in different ways, which is a sign some awakening is taking place. And I think an awakening to what the gateway system was designed to do is taking place, but people have different perspectives on it right now. So I wouldn't just listen to one perspective, but don't be swayed that someone, just because they know one thing, that they know everything, because I don't. So what's happening with the East Gate? Wonderful. I didn't know what's going to happen with the East Gate. I know, I've seen Northwest and East Gate opened for a specific purpose, but I don't have any personal revelation of what's going to happen with the East Gate, whatever. The West Gate is where I've been focusing on to start with, but we do have a mandate to open all the gates and to understand them. And I guess when we get to the East Gate, whatever, we'll have some understanding potentially of what that is. And if revelation has already been released, then I'm quite happy to receive that revelation if I resonate with it, So I think you generally find that God speaks to different people in different ways. We just got to be careful that we don't adopt everything that one person thinks and then reject things that other people think. And we get a balance that God is speaking through different people in different ways and discern what I can receive and what I need to just sort of lay on one side. So when I heard, the East Gate was opening, I rejoiced. When I heard that I was also being told that I couldn't open the other gates, I just thought, well, I'm just totally ignoring that because I know that isn't true. So, that's just how it works. So, Hi everyone, we're starting a Patreon page and we would like to invite you to partner with us. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/freedomarc. Partner with us in taking the message of God's unconditional love, limitless grace, triumphant mercy to a bigger global audience.